right, there we go. All right, so we're live. We are, I don't know if TikTok is working or not. I'm hoping it is. I'm about to check. But yeah, let's see here. Yeah, we're going to check all the channels and stuff. We're doing something a little different today. We haven't done this before. All right, so I know Twitch is working because I just got that notification. So let's double. Perfect. Awesome. All right. So what up, everybody? We're back. Those of you that were watching the stream earlier over on TikTok, I am out in the middle of the lake. Joe obviously is not, and we are. He's joining me for an outdoor episode today because we asked the question around social media of what we should talk about, and we had a really good suggestion of talking about mental health, but specifically mental health as it relates to athletes. And athletic health also is why I've got the water, because it is super hot out here. But we figured this was actually a good discussion because June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, or whatever it's called, something like that. And then it also, we just had a very big controversy within the baseball world the other night where I believe it was Starling Marte, one of the Martes, with the Diamondbacks, was seen on the field in tears, being consoled by his manager and teammates because a fan decided to make a comment to him about his mother that died in a car accident a few years back. That fan, the good news is that Major League Baseball handled it very well for once. The fans were in support of him. The coaches and players were in support of him. The league was in support of him. The guy that made the comment was banned from attending games. It all went very well. It could have gone much worse, and we've seen things like this go much worse within the athletic world historically. But it brought up a good thing to discuss as far as what do we actually do about, how can we be better about dealing with mental health in the athletic world? Because, Joe, you know full well that normally mental health is like the last health discussion when we're talking to athletes.
And you're talking about a group of people that are probably some of the most troubled by different flavors and issues within mental health, straight across the board. And a lot of times it's laughed off. Other times it's ostracized. Other times it's belittled. Only now does it feel like even the beginning notes of a larger conversation are taking place around mental health in general, not just for men in athletics.
Yeah.
Because there's absolutely a flavor of this outside of men in athletics, but with men, it's this idea that when you are an athlete, you are deemed among the alpha of your gender. You are deemed to be of a higher breed, of a more skilled nature, of a more talented nature, whatever the case may be. And because of that, you should be above something like mental health issues or something, contending with those pesky things called emotions, and things like that. And when it comes to people talking nonsense, now I'm not the biggest baseball fan. So you had mentioned this to me in inviting me along for today's show, and so I look it up. I looked it up to get a little bit about a little bit of context for what was said, what happened, the whole 9 yards. Because I mean, I love watching baseball live. There's something special about being in a field and all of that kind of stuff. But watching baseball on TV is quite possibly the most boring activity known to man.
Yeah.
So watching organized swimming might be the only thing that's just a little bit boring. But anyway, it's um, to since we are in the realm of athletic conversation, I will quote the great philosopher Mike Tyson
Nice.
and say that people got way too comfortable talking nonsense from behind a keyboard without fear of repercussion.
Oh yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we're a family friendly show here, and so that's not exactly what he said. So if you want the full flavor of that comes with Mike Tyson, look up the quote. But that's in essence what he said. And so yeah, as a multi-sport athlete, and I feel like in this situation I kind of need to reintroduce myself a little bit, because so much of the conversation centers around um, theology, and me as a pastor, and me as a teacher, and me as a nerd, and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily speak openly a lot of the time about me as an athlete. And so, former two-time, former two weight class mixed martial arts champion, um, multi-time strongman champion, uh, powerlifter, and aspiring professional arm wrestler. Just some of the things that I've done in the world of athletics. And so to me, and also being a part of the mental health community, both on the side of being bipolar, but also being on the side of being certified in mental health first aid, in pastoral counseling, all of those kinds of things. Yeah, this whole idea of how we wrap our mind around mental health as it pertains to athletes is one that I do hold very near and dear. That's incredibly understood.
Yeah. And we'll go ahead and also make this clarification also when it talks about being certified in mental health or in pastoral counseling, stuff like that. We are still talking about the kind of pastoral counseling that we always are talking about within Misfits, but within KFM in general. Um, we're talking about the fact that he is not suggesting he's going to be referring you somewhere. He's not saying that he's going to diagnose you. It's not something where it's just pastors and nothing else. It's pastors working with mental health professionals to be able to best serve you in your health, not the other type where it's what's it called, nuthetic or whatever it's called.
Yeah. I'll put it in a very simplistic. I'll put it in a very simplistic way. I'm triage. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to be the one that sits and goes through and diagnoses, or what, you know what I mean. Like, I'm there to perform triage and walk with you for a season as it relates to what exactly you need at that time, and what direction you need to go in from the point that we've been walking together. And that's true for both sides. That's part of why, when looking at counseling in psychology and all of that sort of stuff, that's part of why I went the route of getting certified in trauma informed mental health first aid, because when you're a pastor, you should be learning the skills and trades of pastoral counseling. And so it's kind of one of those, rather than going deep down that road, or getting my MD or something like that. Those two things help serve each other, because I find myself in a beautiful spot to be able to walk with people for a season, to be able to provide what help is needed for that time.
Yeah, and that's what, we want to make sure that we do this right as part of it. So there's a reason why it's Joe and I. One, I'm on here because this is my thing, but I have worked in the mental health field, not as a mental health professional that can diagnose, but in terms of doing the triage work. I'm a qualified human service worker. I am partially certified because I wasn't able, it took too long to get the other half, and I wasn't there anymore. In prevention science and things like that. I've gone through multiple trauma courses and things like that as well for trauma-informed care and all of that. I'm married to a social worker who is actually a mental health professional. So we aren't just saying, well, this sounds good. We have the training, we have the knowledge. The unfortunate thing, though, is that the reason we have to have this discussion is because a lot of people do not. But they want to pretend that they do. And so we wanted to make sure that we are doing this well. Okay, I thought I had something on there, but I don't. We want to make sure we're doing it well. We want to make sure that people understand why it's the two of us doing this. I asked Joe if he wanted to jump on, and as soon as he heard what we were talking about, he's like, you better believe I'm going to be there. So all that to say, we know what we're talking about because we're both athletes. We both have mental health training. We both have dealt with mental health from a perspective of an athlete and also from the perspective of a pastor and as perspective of a client and as perspective of all these different things. We know what we're talking about. That's why we are the ones talking about it. Now, to bring us back to where we were, though, the problems come in when we start to look at, historically at least, how this has been handled for men, but especially for athletic men. And we're back to we're dealing with the toxic masculinity stuff is where we're starting. That's really where it starts, because you use the phrase, because there was no better phrase to use, but this idea of the alpha style male is a big piece to why this is a problem. So let's actually just start there and work our way around. From a church perspective, how can we better deal with the toxic masculinity stuff that men are going through, that women are going through, that everybody's seeing in culture and on TV and all these other things? What's the first step for us in terms of, as a church, to be able to combat this kind of thing?
Burn down the system. No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. But anyway, I went through, so for context, and I bring this up because A, I think it's funny, and B, it's a little ironic considering where I'm at in all of the different titles and forms of my life. I was first introduced into the sport of strongman by way of a group called Team Impact. For those of you that know, you know. We went to a demonstration. I was a teenager, and I saw dudes running through sheets of ice. I saw dudes ripping phone books and all this crazy nonsense. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like this is amazing. And so I was introduced to my first love in the athletic world within the church context. That matters because when you look at the realities of what it means to be a Christian man, there is an expectation on you to be strong, to be the type of person that stands above other men because you stand for truth, and so you should be a class above other people. See, every single flavor of nonsense has an air of truth in it. It has a piece of truth that the nonsense is built around. Otherwise, the nonsense would fall apart. Otherwise, if I tried to tell you that the sky is turquoise or the sky is red or the sky whatever, you would absolutely think I was off my rocker because it's not. Just look outside. But if I tell you that the sky is, an off shade from this or the whatever, if I tell you something that's born out of a place of some level of truth, then that lie becomes a lot more palatable. That concept becomes a lot more palatable. And so the first step is to recognize the misunderstanding in and of itself. I go back to why I say my first love. I've done a lot in the world of athletics. My first love is how can I be as physically strong as I possibly can be? That is my main goal as an athlete, especially now that I'm back on my feet after my broken leg and all of that. It kind of refocused me toward first love as an athlete. And so I'm back in this world of um training my body in a specific way. And I look around in the world around me, and part of the reason why I don't get on a lot of shows and why I trust CSRM to be one of the only voices that I trust my story with is because when I tend to talk about athletics from a Christian perspective, it's steeped. I'm talking to somebody who is steeped in the misunderstanding
Right.
of what it means to be strong and what the priority is and things like that. And so before you ever get to applicable steps, three big notions to be able to cure toxic masculinity or any of that sort of stuff, if you don't know that there's a problem, if you aren't putting this perspective that you have on men and masculine culture under the magnifying glass, then you cannot actually do anything about it because you're not reading out of the same book, you're not playing the same game, you're not in that space. And so when we look at what it means to be a man, this is pervasive. It's not just about being physically strong, though that is absolutely part of it. That is absolutely tied into you go to a men's conference or whatever like that, you get some dude jacked to the gills, military something or other, or steroided up something or other, or whatever the case may be, and you got to be a good soldier for Christ, sort of thing. And likewise, you have all of this centered around purity, all of
Mhm.
this centered around. I love how member of the KFM family, Jake Dobrens, put it. That so much of what it means to be a good proper man centers around crotch Christianity. I love the way that he puts that. But likewise, it stems on things like in order to be a real man, you have to have kids. In order to be a real man, you have to be a parent or you have to be married or different things like that. And so when we look at what does it mean to be a man and starting to combat those things, the first step is interrogate what's being said. Interrogate the criteria that's being posited forward on what it means to be a real man. Because if part of it lends to this idea that as a man, you have to be detached from your feelings, you have to be reserved, you have to be, you have to be, you have to be. Well, suddenly then you've got a lot of man-made criteria that stunts the conversation before you can go any further.
Yeah. And that's what, even though I knew you hated that question, that's part of why I asked it, is because it it seems like you were not answering the question. In reality, you did, because the first part of it is just acknowledging what the problem actually is, and that's something that, because of how much stuff we have to deal with when we are in a leadership position, but especially when we're in a leadership position within a sports ministry where you've got coaches to deal with, you've got leagues to deal with, all this sort of stuff. It's a little bit harder to spend time just thinking through, well, what is the actual problem here? Because we've got all this other focus, so we just go and we do the sports thing, but it doesn't actually help anybody, because we're not actually fixing the problem. One of the things that we talk about all the time when we're doing the sports leagues is that if the church is going to do the sports league and do it right, then we have to be providing a quality experience, something that is at least rivaling the public leagues, if not bettering it. One of those areas that we can very easily be bettering it is in actually providing a spot for men, a spot for women as well, a spot for kids to be able to actually experience the athletic world, experience their gifts, experience all this stuff without having those kind of pressures thrown on them. Last night I was at we went and watched a friend of ours' son play. He was playing travel ball, and it was the same old thing for travel ball, where these are 14-year-old kids, and you've got this grown man that is screaming at them, because they're 14-year-old kids, and so of course they're not able to do everything that even a high school level kid is able to do. A varsity level high school kid is gonna be able to do more than this 14-year-old can. And even some of the parent reactions were like that, where it was, not necessarily screaming at their kids, but disappointment in their kids, all this other stuff. And, we say we're going to offer something better within our churches. We're not going to hire coaches that are going to do that kind of stuff. We're going to, make sure that our parents are aware of what the expectations are for them. We're going to make sure all these expectations are met and set up ahead of time. But unless we actually start to address what it is that is making these leagues do that, we're not ever going to actually be able to benefit the community in the way that we think we are. Because the kids are still going to hear the same stuff at school. They're still going to hear the same stuff on TV. They're still going to hear all this sort of stuff. So we've got to provide something better. And one of the places we can do that, I think, is in this: how do we actually talk about mental health? How do we deal with it? And Joe, we're hoping you're going to do a full episode for CSRM with this anyway. But you have a different world that deals with this as well within the bodybuilding community and everything else, because you're dealing with things like the extreme positivity, the mindset sciences, and all these other things. Where I don't even know where we want to start, or if somebody's got comments to help us figure out where we want to start with this, because the rest of the conversation is the one where it's much more of, what does this actually look like in the world? Like, how do we deal with this kind of stuff? What does this look like? Because we talk about, well, this needs to change, but how do we actually start to change it? You have a very unique perspective coming out of the bodybuilding and the weightlifting and everything else. So let's start there, actually, and talk about the fact that, first of all, what the culture is, and then how you specifically deal with that.
So it's there. So there's going to be, before I go any further, an evident duality that exists. where for every single point that I bring up, there is a good version of it, a good flavor of it, and there's a bridge too far. So literally, just about every single solitary thing that I bring up will have that. And so be aware of that. So when you hear me talk, especially if you're from the strength community, um, that you'll hear me reference something and you may say, but what about? I fully recognize all what about. That's what makes this tricky. That's what makes this a a nuanced road that you have to walk. And so there's tends to be two main um, camps that center around this idea of strength athletics, body related stuff like that. It's toxic positivity, where I am, I'm just like, I'm so happy because I am part of the health and wellness community, because I'm doing something to better myself, mind, body, and soul, that all the world's problems are solved because I've gotten involved in this sport, or I've gotten involved in this this process, whatever. The other side is, it is a shield or coping mechanism for very deep and real trauma. And so you have two very different mindsets that bring about this idea of what is the actual application of mental health when it comes to the sport that I'm a part of, or the thing that I'm a part of, and things like that, because not everybody that is a part of this at in athletic level is necessarily competing, but it's still pervasive regardless when you start to engage with the activity and things like that. Then you couple in the fact that the old adage goes, when you are weightlifting, um, the first day you lift is simultaneously the best day and the worst day of your life, because you see that pump, you see yourself in that mirror, and then at the same time, you will always be chasing that feeling again. And it's something that you will always be wrestling with from a place of inferiority, um and going from inferiority to this idea of um imposter syndrome, to this idea of body dysmorphia. I cannot begin to tell you how many strength athletes have body dysmorphia, and how pervasive it is for combat athletes to be to be in the sport, whatever the sport is, if it's boxing, if it's MMA, um, because you are trying to find or an outlet for um the anger issues, or for the issues that you have with whatever the case may be, whatever flavor it is. It is an outlet for trauma, because it's essentially a legalized way for you to be able to get into a fight. That's part of why even though I grew up in a culture where I I am from the Fighting City. I grew up in Joe Frazier's gym. I grew up around um, boxing legends. But there's a reason why you don't necessarily hear me call myself a boxer. I call myself a fighter because for me, it was never about the art of boxing. It was about fighting. And so the reality is, when you have these different outlets and you have these different activities and things like that, you have a variety of different personality types that are attracted to that particular activity and sport. And so when we look at health and wellness, when we look at athletics, when we look at this world, number one, yes, I kind of took a the pretty answer at first with we have to identify that there is a problem. But when it comes to actually starting to work our way through the problem, we have to normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
We have to normalize the fact that, like, for people like me, right? I'll use myself as an example. When you have somebody who went through a weight loss journey as an athlete, um, and not even just as an athlete. Usually, this can happen with people that aren't athletes as well. It is not uncommon to literally have a thing happen in your head where you look in the mirror and you do not see what is there. You see what used to be there. And like that's not hyperbolic. I don't want anybody to misunderstand what I'm saying. That's real. Like you literally do not see the thing that's standing in front of you. You see something entirely different.
Yeah.
And that's a flavor of a larger medical issue called dysmorphia. And so a lot of times that dysmorphia drives really unhealthy habits in the gym or really unhealthy habits around food or different things like that. I have one of the few other spaces that I have talked about my weight loss journey in. I copped to the fact that people ask me, how did you do it? And there's truth behind what I say. I do all of the boring stuff that nobody wants to do. And it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about the dedication to stick to it. Because we're talking about losing obese person's worth of weight. Like we're not talking about I lost 20 pounds. We're talking about a transformation. But the reality is, from a food level, no, I went through a crash diet. I just extended it out for like a year. I went through I developed in a lot of ways an eating disorder in order to beat what I needed to beat and do what I needed to do because I was combating fatty liver disease. That was the whole precipice for me losing weight is getting diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so as a Christian, there wasn't some deeply spiritual explanation for any of this. As a matter of fact, God had very little to do with any of this. It didn't have to do with some deep spiritual, I want to protect God's temple or anything else like that. No, I took some of the same tenets that plagued me psychologically and I weaponized them to do what I needed to do. Again, I'm not saying do it like I did. As a matter of fact, I counsel people whenever they talk to me about this and dig in deep to it. I tell people, dude, there are aspects of how I did it that you should not do it the way that I did. It was not the right way to do it. But we have to normalize being able to talk about this in order for other people to understand that it's a safe place, that it's a safe space, to be able to normalize that even though we are considered alphas, even though we are considered some of the fastest or the strongest or the most skilled at a particular sport, that we are still human beings, that this still requires something of us to be good at what we do, and being able to understand what a healthy approach to these things are like. One of the big questions that I got after my surgery, because I had aspirations and was on track for World's Strongest Man. I was trying to get to the Arnold qualified because in the strength world that's it. Like there's other platforms that are out there other than World's Strongest Man, um, but that title carries with it the pride and the esteem and all of that sort of stuff. And so that was the goal, was to get to Worlds. And I elected to step away from that goal of chasing World's Strongest Man because psychologically I didn't want to have to go back. I didn't want to have to go back to the mentality that it was to be at that high of a level in the strength world. And so the thing I want to be clear about here is, do I think that there's a lot of things that martial arts can do to benefit people? Absolutely. Do I think that there's a lot of things that lifting weights can do to benefit people beyond just the physical? Absolutely. Do I think that more folks needs to go out and touch grass? Absolutely. Do I think that there's a lot of beautiful things that can be done in the world of sports? Absolutely. Do I think that it's the sum total of what makes you a man? Absolutely not. Do I think that you need to be a part of this world in order to qualify within your gender? Absolutely not. And that's where we need to be clear about what about the parameters that we're talking about when it comes to this sort of thing. Because on the same token, when you're talking about fitness and you're talking about the bodybuilding side of this stuff and the strengths and like the aesthetic side of this and all of this sort of stuff, we look to guys like The Rock, right? Dwayne Johnson, this mass monster, this dude that's huge, and all of this sort of stuff. Or we look to Sam Shaw as, as a oh, he looks. It looks like Andrew may have a live one on the line there.
Yeah, we got a big one.
Yeah, I saw the way that line or that pole was bending.
I thought I was stuck.
Um,
I thought I was
y-
stuck
y-
on the weeds. Like huge catfish I just pulled out of the weeds here. Continue.
nice. You look at these different figures on social and on YouTube and in movies and all of that, and we have to make sure that we are keeping the right mindset about what it means to be healthy and athletic and reasonable and all of that sort of stuff. The other part of the reason why I don't ever want to go back to the idea of chasing World's Strongest Man is I don't know who needs to hear this, and it's a truth that many people struggle with. But you're not getting to World's Strongest Man clean.
Yeah.
You're not, and you don't get in today's world to be at the peak when it comes to the epitome of male fitness and masculinity, clean. And I use an example for this. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a movie called Fight Club.
Yeah.
And
But we don't.
Brad Pitt was considered the epitome of masculinity in with his body type in that movie. If you've never seen that movie, he is shredded, like stupidly low body fat percentage for his shirtless scenes. Now, in today's world, post Instagram, post social media, you have you have a guy like that, and he would be considered small, weak. He would be considered, he would have a runner's body and all of that sort of stuff. Where we now look to guys like The Rock as the epitome of masculinity because they're huge and all of that sort of stuff. Because we look at these figures on social media and on our phones and all of that, and we lose track of the fact that that body was built in the lab. That body was not built in the kitchen. That body was like, yes, you need discipline to be able to do this, that, and the other thing. You could take all the stacks in the world. If you eat like garbage and all of this sort of stuff, it's going to stunt how big you get and all of that sort of stuff. Absolutely. You still need to go to the gym. You still need to eat right and all that sort of stuff. But being on this stack and that stack absolutely changes what is possible, especially for a 50-plus-year-old man. Come on. Like, you're kidding yourself if you think for a second that a guy like The Rock is natural.
Oh yeah, and
You know what I mean?
he doesn't even try to hide the fact. Like he admits it fully that it's not.
Yes.
And that's actually something, not to cut your story off, but that you've mentioned The Rock a couple times. I think he's an important piece to discuss here because he is one of the ones that is actually in the process of trying to change the conversation because he regularly talks mental health. He regularly talks emotion. He regularly is, wanting to change the attitude. And I mean, I was never a wrestling fan, so I don't know. Was he always kind of like that, or was this a new development after? Sorry, you got water on you. After he had, kind of left. Uh oh, where did I go? Can you hear me?
You're in the bottom right hand corner. Yeah,
Oh wow,
I can still hear you. You're there. You
that's
need to
interesting.
refix
Yeah, I'm
the
working
layout.
on it. I'm trying to find the button. The reason I disappeared for a while was my phone overheated, so I had to wait for it to heat back up or cool back down. So
Yeah, so a lot of that came out of the conversations that he started having when he had his first daughter and all of that. Though I will say, even in um, even in his first book, he outlines his heritage in a way that's brutally honest, that doesn't shy away from the complicated family dynamic, and doesn't shy away from the fact that he comes from a complicated backstory. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it helps that that positioning himself as a family man is good for his brand.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he is not afraid to be as like he isn't afraid to be soft in front of the cameras. Kind of. He also has it worked into his contract that he can never lose a fight on screen. So there's that.
Well, and he also has the advantage though of he has nothing to lose when looking soft because nobody's going to ever accuse him of being soft. And that
Yes,
is, I guess,
but
part
you
of
just hit a
the
point. You just hit a problem there, and but it's true. It's not that you're wrong,
right.
but there's truth to it. There's a certain level of confidence that comes along with being able to take care of yourself. When somebody like me walks into a room and all of that, nobody is gonna accuse me of not of not working out. That's just the reality. And likewise, I know how to defend myself. Years of martial arts training will do that. Years of boxing experience will do that. Years of competition will do that. But we shouldn't need those things in order to have the level of confidence that it takes to be able to show emotion. I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm
Yeah.
free from it because those things help. Being able to, like, knowing that I am strong helps. Knowing that I can take care of myself helps. But that should not be the defining factor of whether or not we feel safe to be able to be soft or caring or compassionate.
Exactly. Now, the unless you covered it while I was in the middle of my phone overheating, how do you go about, you know, preventing yourself from getting back into the mindset? I know you said part of it is you don't want to be a part of certain worlds and things like that. Like you're not looking to go back to the strongman world. You're not looking to go back to any of that. But at the same time, we know there are athletes never lose their desire to compete. If you know what I mean, we don't. So how do you go about the process then of not falling back into the trap, especially knowing the fact that you potentially could be susceptible to that?
Therapy and intentionality is the shorthand version of what you're saying. So, part of this helps that I am not when so I will always be a part of the strength world. And now that my knee is healed, the next goal is to do another strength event and all of that. So it's not that I'm avoidant of the competition side. Likewise, um, I when I was laid up, I found the world of arm wrestling, and that reptilian part of my brain, as I call it, um, got excited again in a way that I hadn't been because I came up in the era of strength athletics where it was just really becoming a thing, and that can be true in MMA too. When I first started fighting MMA, it was still in the world of people watched one too many UFC pay-per-views and fancying themselves a fighter, sort of thing. So like it was another sport where I get to step in and help build rather than joining something that's already pre-established and all of that sort of stuff. And that to me is a better place for my brain to be able to be rather than um doing something that's already hyper established and super well known and all of that because even being at the top of arm wrestling does I'm still gonna only be known by a niche group of people. And so as I continue into the world of athletics, as I continue into the world of competition, it's not that I'm avoidant of competition in and of itself. It's that I need to be aware of myself. I need to be aware of where my head is at, where my heart is at, where my spirit is at, and why I'm doing what I am doing. Is this a world where I'm just trying to um validate myself? Am I just trying to um establish myself in a way that justifies who I am and what I am and all of that sort of stuff? Or is this a world where I am doing something that I enjoy? I am doing something that helps me, and I'm competing while doing it. And that's where a level of asking um asking big questions matters. Asking questions that probe the whys of why you're doing things and the motivations behind them matters as much as it does, because in order to be able to actually um, wrap your mind around the depths and complexities at a personal level, you have to be willing to ask yourself hard and interrogating questions. And in a lot of ways, in order to contribute to the larger overall conversation of mental health in athletics, you need to be self actualized yourself. You need to be at a point where you are aware of how your head works, how your brain chemistry works, how different stimuli works, and things like that. Because if you are unaware and you just keep defaulting back to this is how I am, this is how it's done, this is the culture, then you're never going to be able to put one foot in front of the other, because you're going to be stuck in how it's always done. You're always going to be stuck in this mindset of this is just, I'm just going through the motions of how it always is. And that's why I say something like therapy is a huge piece, because being able to talk through these things in a safe place matters. It doesn't make you it doesn't make you less than to seek help, to seek assistance, to be aware that there's only so far that you can take this without losing yourself. There's only so long that you can white knuckle trying to work your way through being an athlete and having the right headspace and being able to fight your demons and being able to live at peace and all of that sort of stuff without some help. And that's where we get back to the root core issue that even brings all of this up in the first place. So when we talk about things like seeking help, when we talk about things like therapy, when we talk about things like community and different things like that, and normalizing these conversations, community matters. Where you do it matters. Safe spaces matter. All of that, all of those things matter. Unfortunately, far too often, that landscape is very skewed and very distorted and in a state of disrepair, where it is not safe for you to be able to unload what you are going through and to be able to do so in a safe way. That's just the reality of it. But sometimes you need to look outside of your immediate circle if your immediate circle really and truly and simply is not safe.
Yeah.
There comes a time where you have to look outside of that. And that's where you have to understand that it is not this idea that it does not make you any less of a man, by asking for help. And the more that we normalize that, the more that we allow our light to shine for other people, and be able to do so in a way that um, encourages other people to seek after these things in a healthy and productive way.
Yeah. And that's the parts I heard before my phone overheated again. Um, yeah. And that's the big thing. Normalizing the conversation is a big part of it. Providing safe community is a big part of it. And I think that and you may have already hit this, but I think the hard thing that we have, and this is not just within the church, this is in any kind of environment, is we want to be a place where we can normalize the conversation because we hear people say that all the time. We want to help, but I think we have to we do it in the wrong order. I think we have to become a community that's willing to be safe before we can actually normalize the conversation, if that makes sense. Because I think a lot of times what we end up doing is we try to normalize the conversation without actually doing the work of dealing with our own issues with it. And then we
Yeah.
want to have these conversations, but we're not safe yet. And because we're not safe yet, we never actually are going to be able to normalize it. And that's why we end up in these cycles of where the church hurt keeps happening. The the teammates that teammates that can't they end up having to just leave the sport because they can't handle it, because they still are being ostracized for just being human. All of a sudden we've got to be able to actually do the work to create safe spaces before we can even start to normalize the conversation. So
Yeah.
yeah, you got anything else?
Now, I mean, when talking about something like this, I think we need to remember that every single solitary aspect about this is nuanced. That
Yes,
I think
100%.
sometimes when we talk about sports and athletics, because there's so much toxicity when it comes to kids and adults in sports in the church, that it gets demonized. That anytime that you have a youth group that's doing flag football, or you have a youth pastor that's also a coach, or you have any flavor of that integration, or you've got people within the church talking sports or that are athletic or any of those kinds of things, immediately they're painted with a particular brush because of all of the people that have done it wrong and things like that. And don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
there are plenty of people that have done it wrong. I do not. There was one season where I taught um, a youth class for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Never again. I just dealing with parents and all of that sort of stuff. Absolutely not. Like there's literally no way, because half of them think I was being too soft, half of them think I was being too hard, all of that sort of stuff. And so everybody's got an opinion on how you're doing it, and I don't care to hear most of them. And so, for me, I won't go into the youth side of coaching. Um, a very good friend of mine, fellow podcaster, host of My Seminary Life, Brandon Knight, and pastor
Mm-hmm.
in his own right. Um, we joke that he is a professional ninja, because he teaches ninja classes for youth, and a lot of it is about discipline. A lot of it is about activity and trying to instill confidence and trying to instill good habits from a young age. And he loves working with the youth. It's something that he is flourishing in. And so, and he's also a long time a lifelong martial artist. But for him, it's less about the competition side and more about the actual art form of martial arts. And so he he finds great joy in all of that. We need to make sure that we are being aware of the fact that each person approaches this thing differently. And we have
Yeah.
to investigate whether or not the person is safe rather than just taking whatever title or activity that they do and saying that is great or that is bad based solely off of that. And we need to normalize being able to say that we are not okay. There
Yeah.
is a level of I am hiding behind the sport that I do as a means of processing trauma and grief and all of that sort of stuff versus uh, having an outlet in the things that we do and all of that sort of stuff. Again, a fine line between toxic and healthy. All of this is a fine line between toxic and healthy. But when we just attribute gender roles to it, when we just
Yeah.
attribute what it means to be an alpha male, when we just attribute these as the tenets for what it means to be a real enter your gender here, that's where we've allowed the train to go fully and completely off the tracks.
And that you actually just reminded me of the other part of it is that, the other part of this conversation that doesn't seem like it's connected, but it is in the way that we, and I'm trying to figure out the nicest way to say this. Certain demographics will talk about women's sports, that they will talk about women athletes, that they will even talk about the way that kids are playing the game in terms of showing emotion in like a joyful way.
Yeah.
You it's the same. It doesn't seem like it's from the same beast, but it comes from the same mindset of what emotion is okay, who's allowed to show it. And it's part of why we end up with, from the mental health side, this is part of the reason that there it's a different area, but we've got to watch the mental health of women athletes just in the way that they're talked about. They hear the fact that you have men talking about the fact that if they are too athletic, then they'll never be able to be married. You hear men that will complain about the fact that women are getting their due now within the televised sport world, and they're not even getting their due. They're just slightly being allowed to actually be on TV now. You hear people complain about that, and these athletes hear it. Most of women's sports are college athletes, so these are still younger kids in many sense, in the sense of the word. They're hearing people talk about them as if they are worthless just because they are not the male athletes or
Yeah.
they don't fit the right thing. We've got to be it all, and this is why we said what we did. As far as it starts with, are we even a safe community before we can even start talking about normalizing the conversation? That
Yeah.
kind of attitude is not a safe spot for anybody, but especially not for athletes, and especially not for women athletes or athletes that don't necessarily look like they're athletes. Those that don't fit that mold, those that aren't necessarily strong, those that are in more skilled athletic competitions that people will say, well, that's not a real sport, but it in reality it is. Even those
Right.
kind of conversations that we're having is part of this thing that we're talking about, as far as, are we actually providing safe spaces for athletes even to come to, let alone before we start trying to help them deal with things like mental health and everything else.
I
So
mean, when we look
yeah, go
at
ahead.
what it means to be able to take somebody seriously as a person, we need to be understanding of the fact that we that regardless they are a person first
Yes.
and whatever else. And that's where it comes down to making sure that we aren't so wrapped up in defining what makes a person or credible or worthy of respect or anything else like that. Um, and not just and not losing sight of the fact that they are a person, all in the name of qualifying to say, are they enough of this? Are they credible enough or anything else like that? Because a lot of times that goes out of the realm of whether or not their sport or position is legitimate or performance is legitimate, down to whether or not the person is legitimate and
Yeah.
worthy of respect.
And we're back to Imago Dei. I mean,
Yeah,
surprise, surprise, we're back to Imago Dei. And this is why within Misfits, at least, we've classified the Imago Dei as an essential doctrine for Christianity, because it everything is tied up in this idea of who do you say that mankind is? Who is mankind's worth tied to? What is mankind's worth tied to? Is it tied to the fact that they bear the image of their creator, or is it tied to whatever it is that you're wanting to get out of them? In this case,
yeah,
entertainment. What is it that gives a person their worth? Because if it's not the Imago Dei, then the church has no business claiming that it's the church. I mean, straightforward. There's no reason to even claim to be a church league or a church at all if the worth of a person is still tied to something like their athletic performance, or if they have kids or not, or what their BMI is, or what they're able to max out on. If that is what the worth of a person is, then we've lost the plot.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Joe, I don't know if you got anything else. I don't know if we got. I've been trying to keep track of the comments. I don't see very many. I see our good friends Mustache and Panda over on Twitch talking a little bit. But if anybody's got any final questions before we shut down, for some reason TikTok shut off. I don't know why. I'll have to look into that. Those that are interested in how the rest of my fishing day is going to go, I'm going to be out here probably another 20 minutes or so. Joe, I think, probably has to run though, and probably doesn't want to sit around and watch me keep watching my phone burn out. So if
Yeah.
you're interested in what's going on, you can run over to our TikTok account and check out everything going on over there. You can also find Joe now has a TikTok channel. Also, it's the normal at Buddy Walk Pod, or is it at Buddy Walk Pod, or is it Buddy Walk with Jesus?
That's that, Buddy Walk on.
Buddy Walk Pod. So go find that. He's actually been doing a lot of videos related to what we've been talking about today. Again, that's part of why he and I decided to do this together, is that he and I both spend a good amount of time talking mental health and things like that. And so we figured it was a good one to kind of co-op together on. So go check out all that. Uh, you got anything else you want to plug while we're at it?
Yeah, no, I mean that's about the size of it. We have I have a Twitch account that
That's great.
had uh did I did I pop off?
What? Do what?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, that's weird. My camera shut off and all that.
Oh,
Anyway,
I can see you too.
um oh weird. Okay. I've got a Twitch account as well, again, Buddy Walk Pod, where you can see I've got I do live podcast recordings, and we have a series that I do called Pastor Reacts, where I take different, sometimes it's topical, other times it's conceptual, where I give my 2 cents and we talk about it. So you can find me over there as well.
Yeah, so go check all that good stuff out. You can check all of Joe and I's stuff over on the KFM website. So it's kfmbroadcasting.com. There's also the prayer portal there. So if you've got a prayer request and want to share it with our team, it's kfmbroadcasting.com/prayer. And then you can leave as much or little information as you want, and then we will be able to get it to our team to be prayed for. And then on the overwhelming victory side, just be on the lookout. We're in the process of redoing the website, both OV and CSRM. We're also hoping to do this a little bit more often. So right now we're looking at doing about once a month, where I'll be out doing the fishing stuff through the overwhelming victory and CSRM channels. So keep an eye out for all that good stuff. Yeah, I think that's about it. So, and it looks like I may have frozen or Joe has frozen, one of the two. So we will see you all later.
Bye.